Well, it is 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Product Management. Not every feature is a priority. I'm looking forward to hearing about the prioritization frameworks to choose the best feature to build for a startup. We're happy to have Ritwik with us from Oracle to discuss product management and several items to keep in mind as a product manager. Ritwik is from Illinois Tech and recently graduated in the past year, and currently working at Oracle as a product manager in cybersecurity. Thank you, Ritwik, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm pretty excited to talk about what I know and hopefully people will find it useful. Um, so let me introduce myself. My name is Ritwik, and I'm currently a technical product manager at Oracle. I'm currently working on security analytics products for our team of global product security. So what that means is on a day-to-day, I'm performing data studies, talking to a lot of internal customers, talking about the features they need for their products, which provide the most value, and trying to ideate and develop those features. So being a technical product manager means that I get to perform those data studies myself. And being an internal product manager means that all my customers are internal to Oracle. So that includes developers across the company, other product managers, the security folk, government contracts, and all those people. I want to be able to make sure that all the products Oracle is deploying are very secure and hackers can't attack them. So there's a couple of type of products I'm working on right now. One of which is understanding the vulnerability and security posture for every single product. And there's over 10,000 products at Oracle. We're trying to predict what kind of vulnerabilities arise in these products and trying to provide trainings to over 150,000 developers to and try and mitigate those attacks in the future. Before joining Oracle, I worked at American Express as a product manager and software engineer. I was working on their cloud team and I got to ideate a lot of different products. And before that, I worked in data engineering role at Barchart, which is a Chicago company, where I worked on a data as a service product, which provided financial data to a lot of trading companies, along with commodity data and all other oil data, etc. So about this product, about this presentation overall, here's the agenda. I'm going to be talking about a few product concepts and product prioritization frameworks. So prioritization frameworks are related to what feature should you implement first and what feature drives the most value for your users. And before I go to prioritization frameworks, which is like step 4, I need to bring you all back to step 1, which are some pure product concepts you need to understand. So when I say product concepts, I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things. I'm going to be talking about what a product is, why a lot of student products fail, what are some different frameworks and agendas that a lot of top companies and teams across the world apply that are very useful and work really well, and how prioritization works into all of this. So we can go to the next slide. So what is a product? The definition for product is very loosely defined in the tech industry. And since I'm coming from a tech industry perspective, a lot of this is going to be geared towards software products, but I'll try to also include in some hardware and other concepts as well. So like I said, the product is very loosely defined. If you're in a consumer package industry, a lot of people have a very good idea of what a product is. You can go to a store, you can buy an object, hold it in your hand. But because you're working in a software industry, product is something that's not even physical, but it's something deployed on a cloud somewhere. For a lot of companies, their core product is a bunch of features that they've put together, each of which has been very tested very heavily. So my team likes to subscribe to a very holistic meaning of a product, which is a product is anything that provides a value to a customer segment. It has a lot of different points to it. It can include the technology associated in building the product, the functionality it provides the users, the UI UX that is related to the product, like how pretty it looks and how useful it is, and can customers figure out how to use it? How do you make money from it? How do you increase your customer base? And offline experiences. And by offline experiences, I typically mean products like Airbnb, where once you've rented a place, you want to be able to make sure you have a good time at that place. So offline experience is also a huge part of it. So we can go to the next slide. So I want to talk about why a lot of student products fail. A lot of this might be familiar to a lot of you, but I'm just going to go over it again. I talked to a lot of student projects and student entrepreneurs before, talking to a couple of people who joined as product managers with me at Oracle, and this is what the story typically is. You have a very cool idea to solve a problem. So it starts with your idea, and then you want to enter a startup pitch competition like the one we're having this week at Chicago Startup Week, and you kind of work on it and build a lean canvas model. And by the time you work on a lean canvas model, you're already ignoring a few ideas that might be better than what you have, but you're just going around with it because you're very happy with your idea. So basically, you create a roadmap and requirements to work on your idea, and you set different deadlines and dates. So by the time you're here, you're going to start already feeling some you're going to be feeling some discomfort. You're not really sure it'll work or not, but you kind of go ahead with it. Um, so you basically define your roadmap. You might not know how to build it, so you bring some few external people in, but they probably are not going to have a lot of say in the idea because it's already been developed from the start. And you get together, build the idea, and maybe deploy the product. 3 out of 4 times, there's a very high likelihood that the product is not going to work out. So what I just described to you is called a waterfall development model, waterfall method. There's different names for it. It is typically deployed in large companies where you have a lot of requirements. And it seems like the logical step, right? You have an idea, you make a business case, you build it, but there's a lot of problems with it. We can start with a couple of those inconvenient truths from the start. And the first one is, it kind of feels rude to say, but in my team, we talk about how half your ideas are not going to simply work out. I think good teams kind of estimate about 3/4 of their product ideas to not work out. So you got to be ready to accept that fact. Just because you visualize something in your head and it's wonderful, it doesn't mean it's going to work. And the problem with the waterfall model is you can't test it until you build and completely deploy it. And as a student, this might take you several months to do that, which is always not great. And when you work on roadmap and requirements, you have specific dates. You want to get something done by those dates, right? You're trying to focus on output. How much work are we getting done in the given time? Are we meeting our deadlines? But one of the biggest things I learned is you can't focus on the output. You have to focus on the outcome. It's not about how many features you build. It's about if people are using the features you built. You got to be able to measure how people are liking it. And when you go through the whole waterfall method, it's hard to pinpoint where you went wrong after you build the whole thing. So you can't do damage control at the end. It's always not great. And as students, you probably are not going to start with a lot of capital, right? You have all your passions, you have your ideas. So the opportunity cost is not necessarily monetary. It's kind of like your motivation. You could have been applying to internships in the time you're working on a failed idea. So I think high opportunity cost is the biggest problem you have with the waterfall model. So if this waterfall model is not going to work, there's a different model you need to apply, something that's been used by a lot of companies around the world, and that's typically accepted as a golden standard. It has a lot of different names. It's called continuous discovery and delivery. It's called dual track agile. My team calls it dual track agile at Oracle. Next slide. So dual track agile is a very interesting process to validate product ideas in the fastest and cheapest way possible. The idea is that you're not going to build something if you don't know it works. So you have to make sure you address a bunch of risks in the discovery pipeline. You basically look at a feature, look at an idea, and say, these are the risks that can affect this idea. And you have to address them, write them down, talk with your team, and develop it more. And then you have to work on an MVP. So typically, a lot of teams define MVPs as a minimum viable product. There's a different definition for it in the discovery pipeline. It could be called a minimum viable prototype. You're not writing a single line of code. You're not developing the application at all. You're simply trying to work on the UI UX. Maybe you're working on a prototype on Adobe XD, and you're trying to test it with users, making sure they like it. So once you address these risks and you've done all the tests that you want to do, you put all these ideas that you've had, which are validated, into something called a product backlog. So this is where prioritization kind of comes in. People should be able to, people in the development teams should be able to pick out an idea from a product backlog and compare with everything else, and then decide which of these ideas and features we're going to implement first. And that is something called delivery pipeline. Delivery is when you build it. And the whole purpose of delivery is for you to achieve a product market fit, which is what is the minimum product you can build that satisfies your customers. And hopefully it'll help you achieve your vision. So in the discovery track, I said we're going to be addressing some risks, right? So we can take a look at what a couple of those risks are. And these risks are going to be coming back in the prioritization section later. So I'll make sure to mention those specifically. Next slide. So like I said, product discovery is about taking all the ideas that you've had and separating the good ideas from the bad. And there's 4 major risks you're trying to address when you're building the minimum viable prototypes. The first one is called value risk. Before you build anything, for every feature, you have to see, does this idea that I had solve the user's problem? And this can be something that you think of in your head. There's something called founder bias. You think everything you think of is a wonderful idea and it'll work really well, but you can't really do that. So you got to talk to customers and make sure it solves the problem. So once it does that, there's something called a usability risk, which is idea works, but can the user figure out how to use it without you having to give them explicit directions? If you have to write a notebook of directions to use something, they're not going to use it. Like, it's not going to be worth your time and their time. So that is another major risk. Feasibility risk. Can you build a thing you said which will solve the problem? So if you don't have the development power, you can probably get it. But is there technology that can do this solve this problem? If there's no technology, doesn't matter how good your idea is, it's for a later stage. And business risk. Does this product kind of help us achieve our vision? Is this helping us get more audience, get more customers, and are they using the product more? So this is basically what the discovery track is. And like I said, it produces a validated product backlog, and those are the risks you're trying to address. So you can go to the next slide. Like I said, the next slide is delivery, which is basically you're trying to build the good ideas that you've selected from the previous stage, and you want to measure these results. This is going to be a little bit more software engineering, so I'm going to just give you some terms that you think will be very useful for you. So the 4 things are scalability, reliability, availability, and maintainability. You want to make scalability means as the users keeps coming on, you don't want your system to fail. You want it to be working as effectively as possible. Reliability. If something goes wrong, we don't want it to be down forever. You need to get it back up, and it needs to be fault tolerant in a way where it needs to understand a mistake and then pick it back up and start working. Availability. In this day and age, you can't have a website that goes down. It's got to be available every minute of every day for people to use. And maintainability. So I'm using a term there called technical debt, which is basically, let me give you an example. When you go to a hackathon, you're trying to scrape things together with some tape, and you try to make it look pretty for the presentation. But when you're working on real products, you can't afford to do that. You can't afford to keep going back to the same thing you built again and again and trying to make it prettier and work better. You want to be able to keep the performance in mind while building it from the start, so you don't build something really bad. So when you build it, you want to be able to measure outcomes. There's different things. A/B testing is an example where you measure how many times people are clicking this button versus this button, which version of this website do people like more, and you basically want to be able to measure these results and relay this information to discovery. So we can go to the next slide and talk about where prioritization falls. So this is going to be the main objective of this presentation, right? So prioritization is basically evaluating the importance of these items in the product backlog that you've seen and try to pick which one is more important. So it kind of provides the scope for those 4 major risks. Like earlier, we wanted to talk about a value risk. So prioritization kind of tries to address, are we working on the highest business value item? Are we trying to deliver the necessary immediate value to customers? We don't want to build something that will take 3 years to deploy. We want to be able to build something that takes the lowest time and something that can get to the market soon. There's a term for that called time to money. What are some features you can implement and to minimize the time it takes for you to go to market and start making some money? Prioritization is a very big problem. It is something I struggled with when I started working, and which is something a lot of my peers at Oracle have struggled with. Mind the Product is a company which basically surveyed a lot of product managers, I think over 80 or 90, and they found out that over 49% of the product managers listed prioritizing tasks and features to be the #1 problem for them in their jobs. They're simply not sure which feature is more important than the other. So I want to take some time to go through these prioritization frameworks and help you all out to pick the ones that work the best for you. So next slide. So we can talk about a couple of prioritization frameworks. There's about 2,000 prioritization frameworks around the world. Every company builds their own version of it, and I'm presenting you with 4. I think these 4 are the easiest to implement, and which will make your life much easier, and which is something you don't need to work too hard on. Like this is something you can typically have on a website somewhere on Google Docs, and you can just keep updating it over time. You don't want it, I don't want to be I don't want you to basically spend 20 hours working on this, right? It's something you work together as a team and get it done really quick. And basically, there's going to be some differences and similarities in all of these models. A lot of these models involve you putting a feature into a different bucket you can take a look at later. They take in consumer opinions, they take in the development complexity, and they take in different quantitative ways to assess a feature, not just qualitative ways. So we can go to the next slide. So while I'm explaining each of these prioritization frameworks, I want to be able to give you an example, right? So let us consider an event system. So this is something like an Eventbrite. And these are some of the features that I thought about. And the features can include signing up, logging in, resetting password, deleting the account. If there's an event, the user should be able to pay for the event. So choosing between debit card and a credit card to pay for the tickets for the event. So that's another important thing. Basically paying with an Apple Pay, Google Pay, or PayPal if they're on a mobile, potentially creating new events, sharing them. And I have other random features as well. Maybe a user can create exclusive / invite only events. Maybe you get a link in your calendar. Maybe somebody finds an exclusive link to send to you, and only then you'll be able to register. Some visitor analytics. Maybe at the end of the event, the host can get an email saying, hey, these are the people who signed up for the tickets. These are the people who attended these events. And these percent of them attended this session. This percent of people attended a different session. There's no interlap between these sessions. A lot of these statistics like that. Maybe a customer can create online-only events in these time of coronavirus. So maybe they can meet in person. You want to be able to use Zoom plugins, etc. So that is another one. And the last one is a user can choose the app's visual theme. Maybe you find out that your customers like something like a Tumblr, so you can create and visualize different ways that your profile can look. But that's the last feature. So we can go to the next slide and take a look at the first prioritization framework. I'm going to be starting with the framework called Moscat Method. Moscat Method is the easiest one to apply. I might be a little bit biased to it because it was invented by a person named Clegg at Oracle in 1990s. We use it a lot in our teams, but basically the concept of Moscat Method is it takes a feature and puts the feature into 4 buckets. These buckets include must have, should have, could have, won't have. So for every sprint you do, for every release cycle you have, you want to be able to potentially take the features you have from the validated product backlog and put them in each of these buckets. So I know that the must have, should have, could have, won't have don't form the word Moscat together, but people clearly couldn't come up with better acronyms in 1990s. So we're just going to go ahead with it. Let's start with the must have bucket. So these are the most vital things your product won't succeed without. So these are the features that are completely mandatory, and neglecting them basically means your product is going to fail. So these are something you cannot argue about these features. You need to have them. So a simple way to find out if your feature is a must-have feature is asking yourself the question, can this project move forward if this task is undone? If no, it's a must-have feature. Should have. These are non-vital features that could add significant value. So these features can be described as great to have features, but they're simply not top priority. Maybe you don't need to implement these features to get to your product market fit like we talked about earlier. Maybe you just need to do the must-haves. So you simply might not have time and you want to have high delivery success. So you basically kind of shelve these for when you have time, but they're very significant. So the question to ask is, will we move forward with the project if the task is done a little bit later? If the task can be done later and you can still build a product, it is a yes. Could have features. So these are nice to have features that don't add any significant value. So these are small scale improvements that kind of don't take in the considerable resources that you don't want to expend, but they aren't fully essential. They add a little bit of value, not as much as should have bucket. So the absence of the could have features won't affect a lot, simply to say. And won't have features. These are the features that may take a long time to implement, but they simply don't give you enough value to justify that time spent. So these are basically of the lowest importance. So these are the features that can be omitted for value capture. Value capture is a new term. which basically is used a lot in enterprise companies. When you're a company with 200,000 employees and you have a lot of people working on a single product, they basically spend a lot of time trying to tweak a single button, try to tweak a simple form. So you spend a lot of time trying to make things that already exist a little bit better. So you're not trying to create new things, you're just trying to make sure what you have is good. But when you're working on a student startup and you're just starting out, you can't afford to keep tweaking existing things. You want to be able to try new features, see how they work with customers and make them better constantly. So won't have features are typically falling in the last bucket. So now that you know these 4 buckets, let's try and implement the event system with Moscat Method. Next slide, please. So if we kind of classify all of these features, with the Moscat Method, this is what it looks like. So the items in must-have bucket are users can sign up, users can log in, they can reset their password, maybe delete their account, and we want the people to be able to pay for these events, right? They want to be able to buy these tickets and go to these events. So they should be able to choose between credit card and debit card, and you can't have a product if you can't create and share events. So you'll see that the first bucket, the must-have bucket, kind of forms the most bare bones version of your product. So these are the most minimum features you can implement for your product to succeed, much less compete. So once you have the must-have, you can go to the next bucket, should-have, which is a user can create exclusive events, user can view visitors and other analytics, and users can view other online-only events. So these are the events that add significant value, like I said, but you might not have time for the first iteration. So they're all going in the should-have bucket. Could have. A user can pay with Apple Pay, Google Pay, and PayPal. Maybe you notice that a lot of your users are using on mobile. And if that number is significant, we want them to be able to use mobile payment platforms, right? Apple Pay, Google Pay. So basically, depends on the situation. So this might be a cool feature to have, but it simply doesn't fall in the above buckets. And the last one is a user can choose the app's visual theme. That is something that'll make the user happy and excited to go on your platform, but you simply can't afford to do it. I think the most important thing with Moscat Method is kind of setting limits on yourself and your team. You don't want to be able to say, everybody has a perfect product in their head, right? They're imagining what their website looks like, what their app looks like, they're navigating through it. But you have to bring yourself down to a realistic level and say, this is what I want, but this is all I can get. And I want to be able to take the most important ones and only build them first. You have to be more realistic with yourself. So that's basically an example of how Moscat Method can sort these features. Next slide. So there's pros and cons to every single prioritization framework I'm going to walk you all through today. The first pro for Moscat Method, it's easy to communicate. You can bring in anybody and explain what's happening. You can tell them why it falls in different buckets. It's super easy to talk to people about this. It can apply to features, it can apply to whole products, it can apply to bugs, it can apply to almost anything. Honestly, if you're a very busy person, it could apply to your real life. If you have too many things you're doing, too many classes and projects you're working on, you can just decide to put in what you want into those buckets and work with it. So it doesn't necessarily apply for software engineering or product management, it applies to everything. So it's a very simple model to apply. But there's a lot of cons as well. The first con is there's no prioritization for features in a single bucket. I showed you the must-have bucket, right? So log in, sign up, and all those things. How do you decide which of these to build first? Maybe you have 2 days and you have to build 2 features. How do you decide which of those 5 features in the must-have bucket you want to build first? So that is a question Moscat Method simply can't answer. You can't simply give a ranking for everything in there. You have to know all of these. And another thing is that it ignores the implementation effort. Maybe this feature, which is in the must-have bucket, takes 5 weeks. Maybe you don't have 5 weeks, but it is in the must-have bucket, right? So it doesn't take in the implementation effort. Maybe it takes a long time for you to develop these. It is very subjective. You might have disagreed with every single thing I put in those buckets earlier, but since I'm the product manager, I put it in those buckets, right? So this is something you want to be able to run with your team and have a lot of user feedback, basically, when trying to build. You don't want to have 2 people in a room and trying to decide these features. You want to have at least significant number of people. I think the golden number is around 4 or 5 in my teams. You want to have people from, you want to have different stakeholders in the room and talk to all of them when you're prioritizing these features. So it's pretty subjective depending on who you have in the room. And the fourth one is allows for scope creep, which is a new term yet again. Scope creep is a phenomenon for founders to basically keep adding more and more features to the must-have bucket because they imagine the perfect product. You build the must-have features. You simply can't keep moving the end goal further and further because you want to see the best product. You simply can't do that. So that's what's called the scope creep. You can't keep increasing the scope because you're imagining a different product. You need to have the minimum product to test and build, and then improve it later. You can't just build everything. So that's something you have to come to terms with. So you notice, like, you saw all these pros and cons. So let's try to take a look at a model which includes the implementation efforts in a term and complexity of how difficult the feature is to implement. So the next model we can take a look at, next slide please, is called value versus complexity method. Value versus complexity method is like a prioritization framework that allows a product team to evaluate each initiative depending on how much value it's going to actually bring to them, and tries to also keep track of how much value we're going to lose if we don't implement these. So it takes like a balanced approach to business and technology and all these tech aspects of development. So value, what do I mean by value? I think the value is very loosely defined. So a product team establishes the meaning of a value for their team or for their feature on a long-term perspective. They're arbitrarily defined by the team, so they can be anything you want. So some teams talk about value in terms of market demand. Some teams talk about value in terms of customer acquisition, maybe in terms of engagement, customer retention. Maybe you value for you means money, right? You want to prioritize a feature that provides you the most money in return. So like I said, value is very loosely defined. And complexity. Complexity can also mean a lot of things. Basically, the product team can estimate the feature costs of developing this feature to the business and use that as like a proxy for the complexity value. What that means is the team can score a feature based on different categories. What are the operational costs? How much technology and how much hours in cloud you need to buy to basically build this. Developer hours. How long does it take for development to build this? That can be complexity. How much time on the schedule? Do you need to train customers? That can also be considered as complexity. And in-house development skills. So the complexity is very loosely defined. So based on these two different things, you have the feasibility, you have like the freedom to implement, select what the words value and complexity mean to you, and you kind of bucket all of these things. So you put them on a graph, and then everything on the graph falls into these 4 buckets again. The first one is called easy wins. So what are the features that provide a very high value, but they're the easiest to implement? If there's a feature that is amazing and it takes 2 days to implement and it'll make your users happy, that's an easy win. You want to be able to implement those features immediately. So that's an important bucket. So when you're working on a product, you want to take the easy wins first and work on those easy wins. The second bucket is called strategic initiatives. These are the features that are very difficult to build, but once implemented, make the users very, very happy. They can be your unique value proposition maybe, but they just take a lot of time. So they fall into strategic initiatives. You don't want to ignore strategic initiatives, but you also don't want to focus too much on them. Like how much you ignore and how much you focus on them is kind of up to you, but you definitely want to continue implementing these features as time goes on. The third one is time permitting features. These are the features that provide low value and they're low complexity. Maybe it takes a day to build it, but like very few people who are your customers actually use it. This can be a time permitting. What if, basically the next one is time sinks. What if a feature provides very low value, but it takes weeks and months to build? You simply don't want to spend time on that. It's a time sink. It doesn't matter how you think how good a feature is. If it's not going to give you value and people are not going to use it and it takes you 20 weeks of development time, you should ignore it. So that's basically what time sink is. We can go to the next slide and we can take a look at the Eventbrite system in terms of what I just said. Before that, I think somebody had a question about what scope creep was. So scope creep is basically when you're a founder, you have a perfect product in mind and you want to keep adding features to it to make it the perfect product. but you simply can't afford to do that because you have very limited resources and you want to test your product first to see what people think of it before you keep adding more products. So you're changing the scope of product, moving it from bucket to prioritize it because you think it's important. And that's what scope creep is. Hope that helps. So for event system, this is what the value complexity model looks like. The easy events make sense. Login, sign up, creating and sharing events, paying with debit card or credit card. I decided to put in the invite-only events in the easy events section because you might have talked to your developers and they told you, this doesn't take me a long time to build. So you put it in the easy events bucket. Strategic initiatives. So if you're an Eventbrite system, and like I said, after the event, you get all these analytics and wonderful things to understand your audiences better. That might be an amazing value capture for you. So a lot of people would like to see that. So that is a strategic initiative, which would probably take weeks and months to implement, but provides you significant value. And online-only events can be also a strategic initiative. In the sense of coronavirus, you might find it very useful to implement online-only events because that may be where your revenue comes from. And in the maybe section, which is like when you have time kind of thing, time permitting, like payment with Apple Pay, Google Pay, or PayPal. Like all of these different services probably have some APIs, which is application programming interfaces, which you can just connect to and enable those payments. Maybe they don't take a long time. I've seen people do it in like a couple of weeks or like a couple of days at most. So it doesn't take a lot of time. Maybe like a lot of people might not use it, right? So that is in the maybe section. And as usual, time sinks is visual theme selection. How does it look is something that might not be as useful for a lot of people. It might take a long time to build and design everything. So that is in the time sinks section. So we can take a look at the pros and cons for value and complexity model. Next slide. Thank you. Give me a second. Okay, so for value complexity model pros and cons, it is great for identifying low-hanging fruits. What is something you can build easily? What doesn't take, what is something that provides a lot of value? Flexible definitions. Depending on what kind of product you work on, you can define the words value and complexity to mean completely different things that work best for your team. So it's not pretty rigid. And you don't need to have detailed calculations. Bring in 6 people from your team, give them all sticky notes, draw this on a whiteboard, and talk to them about how long it's going to take to develop them, how much value do you think they will provide, and just ask them to put in the sticky notes on the wall, on the different quadrants like I showed you, and ask them to rank these and kind of aggregate them. So it doesn't take a longer time. You don't need to do any detailed calculations, and it's pretty easy to apply. So, but the problem with this, as usual, is if you have 200 features, it's going to be very hard to apply this model. You can't have like infinite going whiteboard, and you can't simply keep aggregating every single feature, seeing where it falls. So it's very hard to apply with a big set of features. And as usual, it is very subjective. With team to team, it's going to vary very differently. So you want to be able to keep that in mind and make sure your team has a good amount of product people, design people, developers, other stakeholders, and get all their inputs from it. So that's another con for this. So we looked at a couple of different frameworks, right? And all of these seem pretty qualitative. You're talking to your team. Let us take a look at something that's more quantitative, something that takes a look at numbers. Next slide, please. So this is called ICE method. ICE method is like a score. Basically, every feature is given a score called ICE score. And this score is simply calculated as impact times confidence divided by effort. There's varying definitions. It can be impact times confidence times ease. So there's like different definitions for it, but this is the definition I like to follow in my team. So impact, the potential gain from this feature in terms of business or strategy. So you talk to your team and you talk to them about how much this product will kind of move the needle on your goals and strategy. Like everyone gives a score on a range of 1 to 10, and you ask them to put a number on it. You aggregate the number, and you basically say, out of 10, this feature has an impact of 9. So the impact can be defined in many different ways. It can be how many different customers you think will use this feature. Like how many customers will like use the feature more since the previous feature, etc. How much revenue? Like that can all be quantified as impact, and after you talk to your team. The reason ICE model is really good is because it has a new metric we haven't talked before called confidence. This is basically the level to which the risks associated with this product were mitigated. I talked to you about product discovery pipeline a while ago, right? And it talked about those 4 risks: value, feasibility, usability, and the business risk. How much time have you spent addressing those risks? If you were busy, you had a lot of homeworks and assignments, and you didn't spend a significant amount of time addressing those risks, you would want to give yourself a lower confidence score because you're not sure how well you will succeed. So that's basically how confidence is measured. Again, it's like a percentage, like you can say, I'm 80% sure, and you can talk to your team, and somebody says 60%, you average it out, and you put the number on the board on a scale of 1 to 10. And the third one is effort. How much time will this project require from product designing, building, and just the overall development operational costs? Effort is it's inversely related to impact and confidence, right? If effort, the more longer a feature takes to implement, then the score is lower. So basically, it's typically calculated with person months. So if a specific feature takes 2 weeks to implement, it's called half a person month. So that's basically how you calculate effort. Next slide. So for the features in the should have bucket earlier, I kind of put together some random scores that I think might be applicable. So you can walk through these ICE scores. So these are all the features you saw earlier, right? A user can create exclusive invite-only events. Maybe you talk to customers and you found out the impact of this, and you found out that it has like a 7 out of 10 on impact. You haven't done a lot of research for it, maybe, so you're giving yourself a confidence value of 6, and it takes a month and a half to implement. So you're basically multiplying 7 times 6 divided by 1.5, which gives you 28. That is your ICE score for that specific feature. The next feature is user can view new visitors and analytics. You talk to people, they love it. Like when big companies want to host events, they want to exactly know who shows up to it. So the impact is amazing. It's 10 out of 10. Maybe the confidence, you've addressed all the risks, it's 10 out of 10. But this feature, it will take a long time to implement. Maybe it takes 4 months. So it's 10 times 10 divided by 4, which gives you an ICE score of 25. A third one is user can create online events. I added the word with Zoom for this feature just to give like an example. It doesn't need to be with Zoom, but basically adding the Zoom makes it easier to implement. Maybe it has high impact 8, high confidence 9, and because we're using Zoom integration, it can simply talk to the Zoom API and make it very easy to integrate it. So it's 8 times 9 divided by 1, which gives it like an ICE score of 72. Now, it doesn't take like a mathematician or a rocket engineer to decide which of these features to implement first. You see whatever has the highest score and then decide this is the most important for this point of time. So that's how you basically get events based on the ICE score. So next slide. Now, like once you know what the ICE score is, pros and cons always happen. My favorite pro about talking about ICE score is it is very easy to communicate your decisions to engineers. Engineers are number people. Like accountants, you can simply say, hey, I calculated the risk, I calculated the impact in terms of people, and I calculated the time taken. And based on this, it looks like this is the best feature for us to implement. Makes sense. Nobody's going to disagree with you because you considered a couple of metrics. Basically, that's how you determine that. There's a question. For ICE scores, do the customers determine them or do you guess those numbers? So you can like mix and match. A lot of people estimate those numbers based on the risks, like I said. Impact, you can instead of using a scale of 1 to 10, you can keep track of how many customers are going to use this product more because of this feature. So you can determine them as a team. I'll talk more about customer opinionated features a little bit later, but that's the answer, Katya. So basically, it reduces speculation because you have a confidence metric. It's a realistic way to look at a product. I haven't spent too much time thinking about this, so I'm going to give it a lower confidence score because I haven't done my due diligence. It's easy to justify decisions. And some of the cons include subjective scoring, right? If you have a team of 3 people and you all give the scores, it'll be very different from when other people do it. For example, if you're a software engineer who just graduated from college, and you have another person in the team who has been working in the industry for 20 years. The effort is something that'll vary very differently. You think this feature will take 2 weeks to implement, but the engineer probably knows this feature will take 2 months to implement. So that is something you only get with experience. So it's kind of like very subjective. Is there a way to decrease subjectivity in scoring? That's a good question. Decreasing subjectivity is kind of the best way to do it is to have more people. there's usually like a golden number, which is something you need to figure out the best number of people for your team to make these decisions. It's around, like, for my team, we have a couple of product managers and designers and engineers. So it comes around to like 6 or 7 people with experience in those fields. I think that's the best way to decrease subjectivity. Just talk to a lot of people, get all their feedback. Allows for team manipulation. I'm a founder and I enjoy this feature very much. Maybe people on the team don't enjoy it that much, but since you're taking averages of all these scores, I can give it 10s across the board. And if you take an average out of it, you are going to get a higher score. And like, people will have to implement the feature that you have because the numbers say so. I mean, that is something like, it's like a team management thing. You can talk to someone about not trying to influence these scores, but more realistically, people will give a higher score to something they think will work better. It doesn't, like, they have their own personal opinions. And like I said, required work will be ranked lower. We talked about how having visitor analytics is amazing. It has 10 impact, 10 confidence, but because it takes a long time, it kind of ranks lower than all the other features you saw. So it kind of puts the required work a little bit lower than everything else. So this is the pros and cons for ICE method. So far, we've looked at putting items in buckets, getting scores for them, looking at impacts. But one of the things we haven't considered is talking to customers and seeing how they like it. So that brings us to our next method, the Conor Method. The Conor Method is like an approach for prioritizing features based on how likely it is to satisfy customers and make them happy. So, like, instead of talking to your own team members, right, you basically talk to customers. So I think the golden number is 12 to 24 people. For every customer persona and customer segment you have, you want to be able to send 12 to 24 surveys to every one of them and ask them these questions. This is feature X. This is how feature X works. How would you feel with this feature? How would you feel without this feature? And it's typically like a 5-point scale. I like it. I expect it. I don't care. I can live with it, and I hate it. And you basically take all of these values in, and there's like a little bit of a complicated way to do this. I'm not going to talk about it now because you can choose to interpret those results how you like. But you're taking those responses and then taking in the decision to implement the functionality to break all these features into different categories again. And these categories are like this: basic features, excitement features, indifferent features, dissatisfaction features, and performance features. So you talk to a customer, get their results, aggregate them, and basically put them into these 5 buckets. And out of these 5 buckets, you 100% want to avoid the features that fall in indifferent category and dissatisfaction category. You don't want to take, like, after you talk to people and people don't care about this, then you shouldn't care about it too. Like, you're getting customer feedback, right? So you have to use it in a good way. So next slide. So this is what the customer satisfaction, I'll just wait for the slide to go next. Okay, so this is how the customer satisfaction kind of varies with the level of implementation, with the level of functionality, right? So let's talk about the basic features, which is the red line at the bottom. These are your must-have features, right? These features your customer expects to be there, and not including them is going to make you lose customers. So it's going to be dissatisfying. But at some point, once you implemented the basic features, and if you want to keep implementing these features that were labeled as basic, customers don't care. Like, once they got the basic functionality, they're not going to care a lot about it. An example for this would be a login system. Maybe you have an account system. Users can sign up, log in. Maybe they can reset their password, but they can't delete their account, right? That may be a basic feature. Maybe like you can implement that, but as you keep adding more and more things related to your profile, they might not simply care because they're not there to look at their profiles. They're there to look at the product itself. So that's an example of a basic feature. Performance features. These are the features that like result in a lot of delight if they're present in the products, and there isn't like some dissatisfaction if they're not at all implemented. An example for this would be, I'm going to take Google Drive as an example. Maybe they're giving you 10 gigabytes of free storage. Maybe they decide, hey, let's not give 10 gigabytes, let's give them 20 gigabytes. You're happy about it. So your customer satisfaction goes up. And as they keep increasing these performance features, if they keep adding more and more gigabytes you get for free, the happier you are. So it kind of has like a linear relation with customer satisfaction. The third one is excitement features. These features trigger happiness, delight, and all these wonderful qualities if you start implementing them. So like the more you implement these features, the happier a customer will be, and like it's just going to keep going up and up. So let's look at a couple of examples with the event system and see how it goes. Next slide. So basically the basic features are sign in, log up, reset password, create and share events, pay with debit card or credit card. Those are the basic events. If you're not going to have those, people are not going to use your product. Simple. Excitement features are having visitor analytics, online only events, and you'll see that I put the user choosing apps with visual theme in the excitement feature. If you go to an app sometimes and you realize you can change it from light mode to dark mode, maybe you can change the colors of the text. You make it look how you want it to look. That'll make a person happy. In the past prioritization features, that feature has always been at the bottom of the ladder, right? But now it's way up there because it has the potential to make people happy. Performance. Maybe people can pay with Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, right? Like maybe they want more options. Adding those options will just make them happier. Indifferent. Maybe you do a customer research and you find out people really don't care about exclusive events because maybe a lot of your customers want to make money from ticket sales. So this is something we haven't considered before, right? In all the previous prioritization frameworks, that has always been in like a could have feature, but now maybe it's not as useful because you talk to customers. Dissatisfaction. I added a feature in here to give you an example. But if there's an option and you talk to users about push notifications, maybe they get a push notification every day to tell them about the events. People are going to hate it probably, and you don't want to think about it. So that's in the dissatisfaction zone. So let's talk about pros and cons for this. Pros focuses on customer opinion. You can understand your own product's strengths, weaknesses, makes you comfortable with implementing these because you've talked to the people. Cons, customers, you can only explain so much. You can't explain to them what goes on behind a feature. You can't explain a lot of different things. You can only give them X amount of information, and if that information is not enough for them to make a informed decision, maybe they don't have the knowledge, and that's a con. Maybe they don't rate it well because they don't understand it. Time consuming. It's going to take a lot of time. For all your features, if you want to talk to 12 to 24 people, it's going to take a significant amount of time, but it is good in the long run. So that's a con because it's very time consuming. And feasibility and ease are kind of ignored, and sample size can skew the results. If you have fewer people, you understand a completely different thing. So you look at like 4 different models, each of which have their own strengths and weaknesses, right? Let's kind of summarize them a little bit more and then like give you like a good framework to work with. So summary. Moscat Method is great if you have small products and you have time-sensitive releases. You want to get this done in a month? Use Moscat Method. It's very easy for you to apply. It doesn't take a lot of discussion. You can just simply start getting going with it. Value complexity, very similar to Moscow. If you have time crunch, it's good for you. It helps you identify low-hanging fruits, which have the least complexity and highest value, and helps you work on them first. ICE method. These are great, especially if you have deployed products and ways of analyzing how it's doing already. If you understand which buttons people are clicking, if you have all these different metrics, you can put them together and make informed decisions because it gives you like a quantitative score. Conor Method. It gives you good opinions, it like helps you form good opinions about your MVPs. It helps you understand what your customers are thinking. And even for mature products or younger products, you can completely understand how your customers feel about this. So that's kind of the summary, and there's no one way to apply this. My team uses Moscat Method, Conor Method, and value versus complexity and adjacent with each other. You can use multiple things. You can like work with them as however you want, just mess around with them and seeing what works best for you. But my biggest advice would be don't make it complicated. If you want to make the best model, you want to put everything in, you're not going to do anything because having too many things in, it's just going to make you realize there's too much work that goes into it and you're not going to apply it. So take the simple ones, try them out. If they work out for you, keep making them better and better. So that's basically the presentation. But before I open up to questions, I wanted to leave some few resources that might be helpful for you, getting into product management and just understanding a couple of things I talked about. The first book is called Inspired by Marty Kagan. Some of the slides in the presentation were inspired by it, and it's kind of like the Bible for product managers based on everyone I've talked to. He teaches you a lot about how good product teams work, which is always great. Sprint by Google Ventures is another wonderful book. It helps you teach how do you validate wonderful ideas in 5 days. And Lean Product Playbook is also like, you probably know about it. It just gives you top-to-down summary of the formats and tells you what are the best ways. If you're like me and you like to listen to podcasts, These are a couple of podcasts I like. The Pitch, there's about 300 episodes, and every episode, a different startup is pitching their company to investors, and they're taking constant feedback. So you get to listen how your pitches will affect people. So it's always amazing. Masters of Scale. Like every episode, this guy named Reid Hoffman, who's a co-founder of LinkedIn, talks to different entrepreneurs and learns secrets about how they made their product successful. How I Built This with the Guy Raz by NPR is also another podcast where they talk about how this system was built and how did it work the best way it can. So these are some of the resources, and hope this helped. I would really suggest for you all to look up these prioritization frameworks online. There's a lot more to them than I explained in this limited time frame. So definitely take a look at them and play around with easy ones first, and then proceed to more mature ones as you keep going. Okay, I just spoke for 50 minutes nonstop. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I will try to answer them and help you out. Okay. Thank you for having me. Okay. From the vantage point of a product manager, what are your views on leveraging low-code tools like Bubble and Alder relative to feature analysis? Okay. So that's a good question. From my experience, I haven't used a lot of low-code tools like Bubble or Adalo. I have never heard of Adalo actually, but I think every problem has a different solution to it, and if those those products work really well for you, I would say go ahead. For example, low code, right? Like Webflow is something that's coming up really well. Squarespace, if this is something you can implement and you have the technology and the knowledge to implement this, you should go ahead with it. You don't have to teach yourself programming to be a product manager. You don't have to teach yourself programming to build a company. Find the best resource you can find, get good at it. If it takes a lower amount of time, implement it. I think low-code tools might be actually pretty good for testing customer opinions a lot. Maybe they have different frameworks to measuring which buttons they're clicking, so you can see how different features are being used. So even though I don't have a lot of experience with it, they might be really helpful. And I'm excited where the future goes, because as a product manager, coding is really not my favorite part of the day. It's about 30% of my job, I would say. But yeah, that's how I feel about low code. I think they're pretty useful. If it works for you, you should go with it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. As a student, I struggle with keeping to a timeline and miscalculate how much time it'll take me. How do you and your team timeline, or how much time do you give yourselves to build a feature? So the time it takes to build a feature varies across the company. My team has a monthly release cycle. So every month we're releasing new features. Some of my peers in different database systems, they have 6-month release cycle. So they have more time to build this feature. So like I talked about the discovery pipeline earlier, you want to be able to address all those risks and make sure you give them to delivery on time. But to measure the time itself is basically I think Moscat Method is the best way to go about it. You have to really prioritize and say, this is a feature we're thinking about. This I don't think will work right now. I think coming from Oracle perspective, in my team, it is very easy to do time management, because for every product, every feature you want to build, we have about 16 to 20 stakeholders, different teams. So one team owns the data, one team owns the technology, one team owns the algorithms maybe. So all of these different things. So it's easy for us to manage the time, because we just talk to these different stakeholders and tell us which feature they like and they hate, and we try to pick out a feature or different things that everyone doesn't hate, or something that everyone likes, and focus on them first. And there's a lot of ideas, right? So it's very easy for us to decide what to build because of a lot of feedback that we have. So if you're a student, I think you have to use a lot of your personal experience, how much can you handle, and just get experience. As you keep going forward with your projects, you will learn to develop those features, I guess. Do you have a favorite tools app that aid you in timeline proper team communications? I love Notion. I've been using Notion for last 3.5 years. We don't use Notion in my team per se, because it runs on AWS and you can't use different clouds when you're working in a cloud company. But I find Notion has a free student tier, You get unlimited documents and like all of these different features. Fun fact that worked for me, I found the CEO's email like a couple of years ago. I think this was like over 3.5, 4 years ago. And I emailed him, told him I liked it. And he gave me like a free version of the app with unlimited storage forever. So I've been using that till now and haven't paid money for it. So that's a pro tip. Reach out to people on LinkedIn and ask them for free stuff and they'll give you free stuff. But yeah, I really like Notion for communicating with my team about our design systems, communicating features, talking to developers. And also like work related, I have to use Confluence, Jira, and all these enterprise tools. But I think like what works best for me at the end of the day is a simple to-do list. I have a to-do list every day, and I basically try to scratch off things, and that works the best for me. Okay. If you have any other questions, you can put them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them the best as I can in the 5 minutes that we have. Before we have any question, I want to like give like an introduction to product management to people if you're interested in the field of product management. I certainly did not expect, like I wanted to be in this field for a while because like it's basically solving problems. So like you want to be able to take a problem and try to come up with the best solution. So like I really like the field overall. But to get into this field, I had a computer science degree. A lot of people typically don't have a computer science degree. You just need to have a good understanding of businesses and what customers think. But to get into this field, for myself, I had like some software engineering experience, a couple of projects. I really like suggest everyone to go to hackathons, take a team with you, build out your ideas in a day, see how it works. That's probably the best advice I can give you. If you're around 200 people building something, it gives you a lot of motivation. And you can use those in your portfolio discussions later on, and you can definitely talk about that. Another advice I would give is have a lot of opinions, but be respectful of others. You can take a specific feature and you can analyze it, seeing how it impacts people, but you also want to take in considerations that the team had when building it, so you can be well informed. You don't want to go to an interview and basically crap on a product somebody built, right? You want to be able to address it in a very respectful way. So have humble but respectful opinions about products, and always keep, like, if you look at anything, if you look at any app, take down notes of the ways you would improve it. That gives you like a really good idea of what it's like to do the job, because you're trying to measure the features and like see how they do, but you need to have like your personal input on it, and don't get attached to ideas. Ideas are temporary. Get attached to the problem statement. If this is a problem we're solving, don't even worry about the ideas. Just keep the problem in mind, and the ideas will keep coming. There's unlimited sources. Everyone's going to contribute something. Yeah, that's some of the feedback I have for product management overall.
Ritwik, could you drop contact information in the, or even your Notion if you want to?
Yes.
But that way people
Okay, let me do that.
can reach out.
So that's my website, and you can reach out to me at oracle.com. So that's my website and my email. I started teaching myself a programming language while I was building my websites. It might not look as pretty as you want it to, but there's a button on it for let's get in touch, and it'll basically send you open up a contact form for me. You can talk to me. Add me on LinkedIn, and I can talk to you about anything. I have a lot of resources for product management and some books, so I can help you out with that as well.
Thank you so much, Ritwik, for sharing everything. This has been incredibly helpful. And as someone who also wants to go into product management, this is amazing and has taught me so much. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. That's so kind.
So for everyone, our next event is, Do You Even Network? So learn about networking tips and tricks at the next event, which is happening right at 3 p.m. This will happen in sessions. So if you want to go there, you can navigate to the left-hand side and click sessions. Thank you again, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.